Men have read to have found out their child isn't actually theirs. How did you react, and how are things now? 2 years of DNA tests that the state continually reported as inconclusive. It led to going to some place out of state. Got it done. Got the test results back. Less than 2% probability of genetic match. Huh. So, I called her up. Asked, so, you wanna tell me what the real story is? 2 weeks before we had our night under the sheets that resulted in the talk 9 months later. Her father had come home drunk out of his mind and rapped her. I still recall the tone of her voice asking me if I had actually taken the test and that it was real. Well, turns out her mother heard that conversation, notified someone, and dad took a DNA test. So her dad is the dad of her kid point, and I felt horrible for her. I can't even joke about this. Her dad was arrested. The kid, last I heard, was doing well. It forced her to clean up her act. She'd gone in for heavy drug and alcohol use, and it drove us apart before the child did. And that was 10 or so years ago. We don't talk. Every once in a while I'll think about the kid, but I dunno. This world ain't a nice place. And with all the shit she'd gone through, I wasn't gonna make it worse. So I left it alone. Point at it. Woke up this morning to my inbox being flooded. Jesus. Some of what's here is taken from other responses I made. Point from what little I heard from mutual friends over the years. Apparently dad came out of prison 3 years later, a Bible guy. This all took place in Texas, by the way. Supposedly he was doing his best to support her and whatnot. But there was some kind of falling out, and she'd moved out and in with one of her girlfriends up in Dallas. I can't even fathom it, to be honest. I still consider the man to be scum-sucking trash for putting his daughter through all that. And I can't exactly fault her at all for her literally wanting me to be the father. She was so hoping that it was the case because it reviled her. The sobbing on the phone when the realization hit was shattering. I remember being on the phone for hours, most of it her crying. I recall my mom after the fact telling me I should sue her. In my mind it was done. I had 2 years of my life interspersed with phone calls, genetic testing visits, even bounty hunters showing up at my door and place of work serving me with notices from her family to show up or else. She had to raise this kid with her sheet father the whole time being ignorant McDumb fuck. All that time. It's faked. Point. A lot of you asked why I left her, why didn't she get an abortion, etc. First of all, when she had originally called me and we had the talk 9 months later, I asked her what she wanted to do. Originally, she wanted to abort it. This was back in 2003 to 2004, so access to clinics was readily available. I asked if that's what she really wanted. She insisted and I had sent her a money order to help pay for it. Point. She never got the abortion. I originally got a story. She went in, took the pill they gave her, and it made her so sick she left. I was 22 to 23 and didn't really know jack shit about how they do abortions. What we learned in high school involved either the scrape or the vacuum cleaner methods. So I took her word for it. Sometime later she went to the courts at her family's insistence and wanted me to provide child support, and that's when I had the choice to either pay for it or get the testing. Point. Talking it out with my parents, cause like fuck all. If I knew what I was doing, I decided on getting the test done. If I was going to pay for it, best to make sure I was the one who should have been responsible. At this point in our relationship, it had been about a year since that night we got down and dirty, and we broke up about 3 to 4 months after that night. I had moved back home with my parents. The job I had in Houston went out of business. I was out of money and had no other options. We broke up due to her frequent alcohol and drug usage. I never understood the need for anyone to get completely wasted on alcohol. 1 to 2 drinks? Fine. Smoke some dope? It's fine. Cocaine? What the fuck? No. So I ended it. She was consistently plastered and uncontrollable. And this was all before I'd even learned she was pregnant. Point. The first test, for whatever reason, took damn near 6 months before anyone heard anything. The results came back inconclusive. I never got any more information than that, so either something happened at the lab or I dunno. I wound up getting referred to a place about an hour away from my parents and went there to get it done. So by the time 2 years since that night of conception rolled around, we finally had the results in. Point. I remember opening the envelope and looking the sheet over. A lot of it I didn't understood. I did see less than 2% chance of genetic match. I called the number at the top of the form and spoke to a woman, provided the info, and she took me through it. There was absolutely no way I could be the father now. I'll admit, I was elated at first. I thanked the woman, hung up and looked at my cell. I had to call her, and reality set in. I called her. After all the crying and admissions, I asked what really happened the day she claims she went in for the abortion. On her way to the clinic she said something inside her clicked, and she wanted to keep it. The roughly $600 I had sent, she used it for clothes and stuff for the baby. I asked why she couldn't have just been honest from the start, and the results of the test were why. Some of you asked why didn't I become the child's father? Because I wasn't ready for it at that point in my life. 23 years old, no job, no prospects, thousands of miles gone, and I never got along with her family. It wouldn't have been good for either of us. In the end we agreed not to be angry with one another. She was pissed at her father though. I don't know if that ever went away, though I highly doubt it did. Also I wasn't ripping on Texas. I actually really like Texas. The people are friendly. I simply wanted to provide some geolocation to what happened, is all. What are insinuating with this all took place in Texas, by the way. That we are alcoholic, Bible thumping, child rapists. I wasn't ripping on Texas. I actually really like Texas. The people are friendly, and I simply wanted to provide some geolocation to what happened, is all. I spent 2 years living in Houston working for a local ed firm. Met a lot of great people, had some amazing BBQ. Seriously, it's like you can't go 2 blocks without hitting a BBQ joint that doesn't rock. And met some folks who were religious, but not Bible thumping nuts. As far as rapists go, only ever met the one, and you're reading about it, so that's it. PS. As far as this reading like a detective novel? Thanks, I think. Didn't make it that far, but had a little fling with a girl, who I was honest and upfront with. It was a fling, and wasn't gonna be serious. She agreed to it. So one time we were getting it on. Condom broke. I told her, and she didn't seem too worried. Mind you, this was way before climax when I noticed. Also I know there was no pre-ejaculation. I had that when I put the new one on. Made sure that everything was good afterwards. Fast forward a couple weeks, and she messages me saying she's preggo. I admit my heart jumped a little, but I called her calm as British bloke drinking tea. She was so surprised that she asked why I wasn't freaking out and getting angry or panicking. Truth is I knew that the likelihood of her being pregnant was very slim, and either way I would man up. No matter what. I asked her all the details. Was I the only one? Have you been drinking since the last time and all that good stuff? I told her I wasn't ready for that, but the ultimate decision was hers to make. She started saying how she would never do such a thing, and I still stayed calm. Told her we would talk in the morning. I was just meeting up with my boys to go party. She was shocked even more that I was still so calm, and started asking where I was going, because she was going out with her friends too. I didn't tell her. After that I knew for sure she was trying to push my buttons, so the next day I spoke to her. She tells me she has to think about it. I said take your time. Eventually a few days later she said she's not gonna keep it, and that she booked an appointment with her doctor, who was in another city and over an hour away. She doesn't drive, and so I offered to give her a ride. She declined and said a friend would give her one. I said I want to be there at least. She said all she could to convince me that I don't need to go with her. So I backed off. I know where she worked, and she worked all day the day she was supposed to go, but she messaged me saying that she went, and that she couldn't walk properly after. I played along, and never spoke to her again. My kids had run into their real father on MySpace, and invited me out to a nice restaurant. When they told me they had something serious to reveal, and they'd invited me here, so I wouldn't make a scene, I started to worry that they were banging each other, but then my whore ex-wife showed up. Anyway, once we got settled down they told me about how their real father had contacted them on MySpace, and had dozens of pictures of himself with my ex-wife from the time a year or so before she'd had the twins. My ex-wife chimed in that she'd had an affair with him, and he didn't have money, so she decided it would be easier to just let me think the twins were mine. I faking lost it. I began shouting with uncontrollable rage and sorrow. I asked every man nearby if he had banged my hoe wife. The twins and my hoe ex-wife told me not to make a scene as I shouted that my life was a lie. Jesus, Frank, that turkey neck beach said, as if I was the one out of line. Oh, Jesus, Frank. I bellowed over and over again in angst. Then I had a heart attack. Point anyway, things are a lot better now. I bought half of the bar the man who I used to think was my son, the man who thinks he's my son, and their friend own, and now we work together along with the woman I thought was my daughter. It's a lot of fun. The whole gang is crazy. My ex-wife died in a botched neck lift surgery, so I guess that's a happy ending for all of us. I have a mixed race child. Originally was told it was mine, until she actually gave birth. Since she was mixed, she came out pretty light-skinned. Very light-skinned, actually. But as she got older, her skin got darker and darker. Let the mother stick around for about a year to 2 years. She wasn't from where we were living, and didn't have anywhere else to go. Didn't want to kick baby out into the streets. Finally, I had enough of her crazy ass, and kicked her out. But, I ended up getting attached to the little girl. Fast forward 2 years and I'm single, lonely, depressed and missing the little girl. I've had no contact with them. Through the grapevine, I hear my little girl's real dad has nothing to do with her. No contact, no father. From the story I get, the real dad was married and refused her. I set up a meeting with my little girl after 2 years to get a feeling on the situation, and it was like those 2 years never happened. She ran up to me like she just saw me yesterday. I talked to the mother, and I said that I'll take care of her. We never went to court. No child support has ever been filed. We don't fight about anything. I tell her if she needs anything as far as money or clothes, whatever, I'll take care of it. She's now 10. I'm married. My wife accepts her with open arms and loves her like I do. She's an awesome kid. Great student. No troubles. I have to teach her a bit of humility, because all she's concerned about is being beautiful. But if that's my biggest worry with her, I think that's okay. I wouldn't change anything at all. I will tell you one thing. I live in the South and you would think that a married white couple with 2 normal white kids and an older mixed girl, one would think you'd get more looks from white folks. Surprisingly, it's the black folks that gives us more what the fuck looks than anything. But like I said, I wouldn't trade her for anything. I love that silly girl. Not a man, never been in this situation, but I'm the child of one of these situations, so I thought I'd chime in, although at this point I think I'm a little late to the party, as usual with these threads. TLDR, mom stayed with her husband at first, and he is legally my father, but my dad decided he wanted to stay in the picture, so my mom eventually married him, and I have 2 dads. My mom got married when she was 17. And had 3 sons with her first husband. I'm going to call him Ben. They were together for a long time, I think about 18 years total. Somewhere along the way she realized she was caught in a loveless marriage, but couldn't really do anything about it. My dad, who I'll call Dave, moved in across the street and the 2 of them started spending time together, and she started an affair with him. They weren't careful enough, and next thing you know my mom is pregnant with me. She knew from the get-go I wasn't Ben's, and he kind of had an idea too because they weren't intimate that often, and the math didn't work out, but I think he went along with it, just because he didn't want to think about what she was doing behind his back. My dad initially didn't want to have anything to do with me, so when I was born, they put down her husband's name on my birth certificate as the father, and called it a day. Paternity tests were done, though, and my mom confirmed what she already knew. Sorry, around here my details get a little fuzzy, because my mom still hasn't given me a full and complete story. Dave still definitely didn't want to stick with my mom and I, and it was just agreed that Ben would raise me as his, and they would forget it happened. He was and is a great guy and an awesome dad. Now, the way I've heard it is Dave, despite his convictions, couldn't stay away, because he loved my mom so much, and once he laid eyes on me, he was head over heels. Some of my earliest memories are going to visit him in his apartment. At some point between the time I was 2 and the time I was 3, my mom and Ben divorced. I don't remember it, and was kept largely out of it, but I understand it was very messy. Because I was legally Ben's daughter, I got the same visitations as my other brothers who were still under 18. My mom and Dave married when I was 4, and Dave was never happy about these visits, but I was, because I loved Ben so much. Ben was always daddy, Dave was dad. It was understood, and I never confused the two, or made reference to one being my parent in front of the other. Even as a 4 and 5-year-old I knew the sensitive nature of the situation. It was never confusing either, because they really are two very different people who I think provided me with a great balance of paternal figures in my life. Like I said, Ben was always daddy. Sweet, endearing, with a heart of gold who just wanted his little girl to be happy and would spoil her rotten to see her smile and make stupid jokes to get a giggle out of her. Dave was dad, still kind and loved me to death, but more of the disciplinarian who I knew not to mess with. My mom's not married to either of them now, another long-winded story entirely, but I consider both of them to be my father and I consider both of them to have done the best job they could have, and I think I turned out alright. Edit. Wow, I didn't read through many of these stories before posting, but for the most part they are pretty bitter and awful. At this point I feel so lucky that everyone was generally happy I existed. Sheet. I know this is so far buried that it won't get much attention, but I hope someone out there can see this as a more positive story despite the faked upness of the situation. I was dating a girl for 3 years who I had trusted. I was 18 at the time. She got pregnant. I was relatively safe, but everybody has slip-ups. I took my lumps and agreed to fatherhood and did the best I could. During the entirety of the pregnancy she was pretty absent. She wouldn't talk to me much, sometimes for months at a time. I thought this was odd. It frustrated me beyond belief. Anyway, so later on a friend of hers started to work with me. He started to hook up with one of my coworkers. She told me he knew my girlfriend, and I was thinking, oh, cool, interesting. Then she told me he banged my girlfriend within the last year. I was pissed. I called her up and talked with her. Apparently they did have sex when we were on some break. This was entirely made up. The timing didn't match up with the pregnancy though. So I continued on my way to fatherhood with this soon to be mother that was all over the place. Eventually she gave birth to a little girl. I wasn't there at the birth because I wasn't told it was happening. A couple of months down the road of trying to contact her she let me see my girl. It was great. We started talking again and acting like parents. Well, just to make sure that this new baby girl was mine I went ahead and had a paternity test. She was a 1% match and therefore was not my daughter. I was appalled. I went to her place and asked her what this was about. She swore up and down, if had to be mine. DNA is DNA. She wasn't my little girl after all. I left her on her knees crying for me to come back to her apartment. I got a text later that day. She told me she remembered. She got blackout drunk and faked this guy at a party. She claimed he basically raped her. I don't believe this at all. So I went through 9 months of a pregnancy and 3 months of actual fatherhood before I found out. Now I don't talk to her at all. I hear rumors occasionally about her. I'm glad she is no longer in my life. TLDR. Fuck that beach. So, I'm on the other side of the fence. Basically I'm dating this girl for about 3 years. Rocky relationship and all that jazz. I break up with her and move back to my hometown for a period. While back she asks if she can come visit, etc. First mistake, but believe me, sex was really golden between us anyway. 2 months after the visit she is pregnant. Not the best news in the world, but I'm from a family of certain values on these matters, so I own up. After spending a week with her and discussing what to do, I go back home and start prepare stuff. 3 days later she calls and claims a miscarriage, and we sort of ended/dies out, no pun intended. The next few weeks fast forward 7 months and I've moved back to the same city, capital of Norway, Oslo, and continue my career. Suddenly I see a FB post about this girl getting a child 9 months and 2 days after her visit. It turns out, she had been dating another dude for the whole 3 years we had been dating. They even lived together for 2 of the years. She kinda just decided that she felt better with him as the dad. So, basically she convinced him he was the dad. So he announced to the whole world and was just about to go on fatherly leave when I found out. I quietly ask her for a paternity test, and to no surprise, it's stated with 99.99% that the father sheets unravel. He is not happy, OBV, and has to tell the world that nope, just kidding, I'm not a dad. Anyways, 4 years later it's all good, and we have 50% shared custody, but damn it was a few funky months in the start point edit, after some questions and stuff. Yes, I did spend time at her apartment. She had me over every time the other guy was away and such. She also fake moved into my apartment for 6 months. I do not feel the need to go into details as it's pretty much a closed chapter, but will answer general questions about the situation. Back in college, I was seeing a girl for a while. Kinda serious, more so for her than me apparently. She winds up pregnant. I was young, didn't really know what to do, but knew if it was mine, I would do the right thing and be the father. Major caveat, I have a physical condition that makes it highly unlikely that I can actually get anyone knocked up, and she knew this. Long story, and possible identifying info, so I'm leaving the details out. Anyway, she swears up down through the whole pregnancy that it could only be mine, so I went along with it. I was out of town the weekend kiddo was born. She apparently tried to reach me, but this was long before cell phones, and I had gone home to a different city with a college friend to party, and in all likelihood, avoid home during that time frame, since I was reasonably sure it wasn't mine. Kiddo was born. I went to see them a few times over the next few weeks, and then shortly after that get called by my folks that she had stopped by their house and introduced it to them as their new grandson, etc. They were ecstatic and happy for me and all the fun stuff they anticipated about being new grandparents. I had to basically put the brakes on real hard at that point and tell them I was pretty sure that it was not my kid. I pretty much knew after I saw it. One look at it, and there was just no connection at all. It was a baby, but I saw nothing there I recognized as mine in any way, shape or form. Points due to the fact that she was already on the dole. The state mandated a paternity test. I figured I just might as well get it over with, and showed up for the appointment. When they told me to point, once the results came back, there was a less than 1% chance it was mine. I turned around, never looked back. Only saw her twice since then, and it's been 20 plus years now, but both times she was almost in tears trying to apologize for doing that to me back then. I heard through the grapevine who ended up being the actual father, and he already had a few bastards running around, so he was no help to them at all. Not only that, but his poor health and drug issues put him in an early grave, so that poor kid had no father figure growing up. Thankfully, I kept a level head through the whole ordeal, and even got a letter of commendation from the county prosecutor's office saying that they wished even half the potential fathers were half as cooperative as I had been. TLDR, if you're gonna try and pin a kid on someone, make sure it's theirs if there's going to be a mandatory DNA test. More than slightly off topic, but I've never met my biological father, and my mother got married to my dad when I was 5 to 6 years old. They'd been dating since I was like 2 or 3. When they got married, I was legally adopted as his kid and took his family name. I know that everyone wants to think that a father is a sperm donor, whereas a dad is a dad, but in both my experience and my older brother's experience it never worked out like that. It was like both he and his parents and my aunts and uncles and cousins would always make a point about telling us that we were part of the family and there was no difference between us and them. I think part of them telling us that all the time was more of them trying to pathologically lie to themselves than actually trying to make us feel like we were all the same. This became even more clear when my dad and mom had a kid together, my younger sister. Around the time I was in high school and she was in elementary school or middle school, he'd call home on his way back from work and ask me to pass the phone to my sister. He'd tell her to put her boots on and meet him outside cause he was taking her out to the movies. He never did that with me or my brother. When my cousins and my sister got to watch TV all day and play games, I had a long list of chores which had to be done twice if they weren't up to par, including detailing the whole house with all the vacuum attachments. From the age of 6. By 7 I was doing my own laundry and cooking my own meals, as well as washing the dishes, taking out the garbage, dusting, chopping wood and shoveling the driveway. when we took our vacations to the cottage, his upper middle class parents' luxury home on the lake. There were ski-doos, sea-doss, tractors, ATVs, etc. the works. I had to wait around all day, sometimes 6 to 7 hours, to get a turn using any of them, at which point after 5 minutes a cousin, a real cousin, a biological cousin, would cry or kick up a fuss about how I was hogging it, and I'd be ordered to stand down. They got to drink a glass of wine with dinner and I didn't. They got to pick which movie we watched when we were sent to the den for the adults to play cards. They got to celebrate their Christmas and Easters and birthdays at the cottage, but mine were always bad timing PFFT. My sister's 20 now, and I don't even think she can boil water, and I doubt she knows how to operate a household appliance. Poor girl. I was told, when I grew up, that I didn't need a cell phone or a laptop or an iPad, and if I wanted any of those things my dad would never sign for me to get on a contract and I'd have to pay out of money I made at a part-time job. My sister's had a collection of iPads, iPhones, netbooks and tablets since she was 15 over 16, because dad thought it was important to know where she was at all times and to be able to be in contact and share with her. He also foots all her bills. When my parents got divorced it seemed like he didn't even bother fighting for me or my brother, just for her. Same with his parents, my cousins, the whole lot. I used to be really jealous and angry at her for a while when I was growing up, but now I'm just really happy she has two parents that love her and she grew up without all the stress I did. I haven't spoken to my dad in 8 to 9 years now and no intention of opening the lines until perhaps he's on his deathbed or something. TLDR, if you're a dad to a kid that ain't yours, remember that actions speak louder than words. I went through a very similar experience, so similar I thought I was reading an autobiography of my life. My mother was living in a small town in Texas. She met my biological father. They were together for a couple years, and she got pregnant with me. My mother left him for her own reasons that are still not known to me. When I was 5, my biological father died in a car accident. By then my mother had married her high school sweetheart, and he was the man I knew as my father. At 5 years old you don't stop and think that he has a different last name. He adopted me, and a year later my mother got pregnant with their first child, my brother. As soon as he was born things were different. I never noticed it until I was older and sat down with my ex-wife and watched old family movies. When we would go on vacations I wouldn't be allowed to do anything. My brother got all the new toys and all the new gadgets. I had to earn mine by doing the house chores and making my own money. When my brother was 3 my mom got pregnant again. Then my sister was born. The apple of my father's eye. He spoiled her. He spoiled my brother. My parents bought a bigger house, and when we moved in, my brother got to pick the room he wanted, and my sister did too. I was stuck with a small room, not even big enough for the bed and dresser that I had. When I was 16, they divorced. And I was upset for a while, because I still saw him as my father. It was faked up in a way. I never saw the emotional abuse until I was in my early 20s and sat down and watched old family movies. He didn't show up to my graduation, didn't come to my wedding, nothing. Well, fast forward, he started to emotionally abuse my brother and sister. He had visitation rights, and he would come and get them on the weekends and for the summer. I was about 19 at the time and he just stopped coming. He broke their hearts. He skipped my brother's graduation, never sent them gifts or cards on holidays or birthdays. One more fast forward. I'm 25, and the faker has the audacity to have me arrested for identity theft. Our social security numbers are exactly one number different in the last 4. We both banked at the same bank, and I had applied for a credit card and they entered it wrong on their end. I'm arrested, dragged through court. My wife leaves me because of the burden it put us through and the financial impact it had on us. Until the bank finally owned up to the mistake and produced my handwritten application and their computer generated one showing their fuck up. All the charges are dropped, and that is that point. Then out of the blue, when it's my baby sister's turn to graduate from high school, he decided it was time to be a father again. He shows up to the graduation and he tries to talk to me. Then he heard that I had gone back to my mother's maiden name as my last name. He completely disowned me at that time. said in front of all the friends and family gathered for my sister's day that it was the biggest mistake of his life to have adopted me. My sister, his blood has nothing to do with him. My brother is on vacation with him now as we speak. I'm getting married on Friday to the most wonderful woman I have ever met. I love her deeply. She loves me. She has 2 children from a precious marriage, and I vow that I will never be like him. For all I care, they are my children and I will go to bat for them. If they are wrong, I'll still stick up for them and take care of it later with them. I will be a father. It takes a boy to father a child. It takes a man to be a father. I have recently gotten in touch with my biological father's family. They all knew about me, but were threatened to never contact me by my adoptive father. I will be meeting my blood brothers, sister, grandmother, aunt, and uncle at my wedding. My soon-to-be wife invited them. She is just as anxious to meet them as I am. TLDR, adoptive father was emotionally abusive. I repressed it growing up, didn't see it again until I was in my early 20s and watched old family movies edit. Thanks for the advice about meeting the biological family beforehand. I hadn't thought about it. My fiance and I will call and make plans for lunch with them. Throwaway account for reasons. I was 16 and in high school when I was dating this girl who was my first love. We will call her K. K and I had sex roughly 3 months before homecoming. We had been only dating for a few weeks prior to that. Being a honey teenager was a nice mix with a girl that was willing to put out. Things go by as they usually do. We still see each other and hump like rabbits. However, Kay was also hanging out with this other guy named Derek every time she wasn't around me. My best friend Matt starts telling me that he's seeing them hold hands and making out by the art room, etc. Sure as shit I catch them in the middle of a hot and heavy session, but being the dumbest kid that I was, I forgave her. A few days later she tells me she hasn't had her period in the last 2 months. Eventually we try to keep things on the down low until the day of homecoming, and by the time we are taking pictures with my whole family around, of course she announces that she's pregnant. So, begins a spiral of madness for the next 7 months after one last night of fun at our homecoming dance. We start discussing what we need to do in order to prepare for the baby. I start applying for jobs, pretty much taking in the fact that my life is order. No more fun for me now. We make preparations to get an apartment, to provide for the kid, etc. My folks are pissed at me, not talking to me until they had to. The rumors around the school are crazy. What makes it worse is that most of them were accusing me of rapping K. Even my friends believed it. The rumor went that I had forced myself on her with no condom and had my way with her. It got so out of hand that counselors would call me in daily to make sure that I was of sound mind. Being accused for being a rapist was insane for being 16, and I wouldn't ever wish that on anyone. It all blew up when I caught Kay sexting my best friend Matt. That's when I started thinking that there was something was up. I know I was a faking idiot. About 2 weeks after she breaks up with me and starts dating Matt, she starts calling me and texting me, calling me a rapist and a piece of shit lowlife. Even though she said these things, she still loved me and wanted me to support our kid. I really start having a mental breakdown, knowing that I can't trust anyone. Hell, even thought about eating a bullet just to end it all. I had no one. My folks moved me to a different school to hope that I could start fresh, but despite this the torment goes on until her delivery date. My whole family is there at the hospital and my stomach is in knots. I can't breathe. This was the night that my adult life would begin. Hours pass and she finally goes through her contractions and the baby is born. The baby comes out to be black. I wish I was joking, and I know how insane this all sounds. The worst part is that my best friend Matt was black. The sheer horror on Kay's face is something that I will never forget and something that I will never forgive. Immediately I go for a DNA test and a few weeks later it comes back that it's not mine. My friend Matt was screwing my girlfriend behind my back the entire time. My whole high school and teenage years were ruined because these people couldn't tell the truth. TLDR, strung around high school as a rapist. Baby came out black. Best friend who was African American was faking my girlfriend the entire time behind my back. I was with someone for 5 years, and during the time we had our issues. Being in a relationship together from the ages of 17 to 22, we of course had our off to live life moments. Well, her and I were giving it our last try. A week after the deed, I noticed the signs of pregnancy and told her to get a test. It was positive. However, she then let me know that before we started to get back together she had been trying to start a family with another man. My father, who had raised my half-brother and I so alike that we never knew he wasn't my brother's bio dad, had set an example for me that family is the most important thing in life. So I accepted the fact that I could be a dad, and I was willing to do everything I could do. After 9 months of trying to be there for her while she bounced between the other man and I, her doctor had advised her that I was most likely the father of the child. So I became the prominent father to everyone in her life at this point. I was overwhelmed with joy that I would become a father and I could try to be the best I could be. A month after the baby was born, she wanted to clarify who the father of the baby was, so we took a test. I was holding the child in my arms when I received the email. I looked at the 0% on the bottom of the results. Devastated, I showed it to her. She replied with, "Well, I should tell the other guy." Her mom and I insisted on raising the child without telling him. He had a terrible drug addiction. But her idea of a perfect family was both biological parents. So that was the last day I had a daughter. I went through 2 terribly depressing years. She would wave the child in my face when she wanted attention, and things never worked out between us after that. I always felt like I had done something wrong and that I let the child down. I had to constantly remind myself that even if I felt like she was my child, she wasn't, and nothing could ever give that back to me. I'm getting through it with the help of a wonderful new girlfriend and incredible friends. But when a man makes a connection with a child, it's the strongest love they will ever feel. Sorry for the long post. I'm not able to really talk to anyone about this, so it's sat on my heart for 2 years. Thanks to anyone who reads this. I met a girl in high school. We will call her Janice. Janice and I hit it off in a library of all places. I was a short twig of a guy, and she was tall and lanky wearing a baggy sweater. I didn't care. She was the first girl to acknowledge my existence. Gradually we became closer. Shared a few classes including gym and lunch. We could make each other laugh to the point of squirting milk out of our noses. People made fun of us. Started calling us the odd couple. Which was awkward at first, because we weren't a couple yet. It was that afternoon she said the words I won't ever forget. "Why aren't we a couple?" "I don't know," I said back. "But I'd like to be, if you would like to be." What followed was my first kiss. It wasn't The Notebook, but from then on we were a couple. Dated, went over to each other's houses, went bowling, small town teen hangout, etc. and would rest under the tree watching finches chirping above us as we talked about Star Trek, Voyager and Buffy. Until one night I asked her to prom. You know how every teen movie ever has that nerdy girl who loses the glasses and suddenly becomes a supermodel? Well, Janice, it turns out, had been drinking her milk. She was embarrassed about it and would wear a baggy sweater to cover this and tape down in gym class. Prom night though, there was no hiding her gorgeous body in that scarlet dress she wore that night. It was unforgettable. Listening to Train and Vitamin C slow dancing eye to eye. I didn't have to look to know people were watching us. It was there, everything felt perfect. I didn't want things to end. But the songs faded and the lights dimmed eventually. I drove her home and kissed her goodnight to the hum of crickets in the surroundings. As I turned to go and get back to my dad's car, she didn't let go of my hand, pulling it back to me. "Don't go," she faintly pleaded. I didn't. And I wish I came more prepared. A few weeks had passed and something was off. I didn't know what immediately. She kept missing school, stacking up sick days. I gladly took notes for her and dropped them off at her place. One day, Janice's dad answers the door, giving me the 1,000-yard stare. "Get inside." It wasn't quite an order, and it wasn't quite a request. "She wants to see you." I was a bit confused. I wanted to see her, hadn't for a while now, but something felt weird. Did he know? It turned out she was missing school and having morning sickness. She was pregnant. She told me I wasn't obligated to do anything. She made that clear. She didn't want to get an abortion and she didn't want to put it up for adoption. I thought I did the right thing. I stayed with her, worked late shifts and hit the books. so I could earn a degree and make this family work. We got married in court and I promised her one day I would afford the wedding. A few months later she gave birth to 2 twins. For a while things weren't bad. I married my high school sweetheart. I was making enough money to provide for this family and my mom was always sending Janice coupons to save us money on groceries and diapers. Mom of course was also a helping hand with the kids. I eventually earned a degree and started making investments in the stock market. I made a few smart moves and everything was looking up. However, one day we started to notice some problems with the twins. They were not quite with it. We went to the doctor. Several trips and tests later, we were told both were autistic. They would likely have problems fitting in and developing, not likely to be self-sufficient. I'd like to tell you we handled it well, that we were going to get through it. But this was the tip of the iceberg. You see, we got the diagnosis in September. A week later 2 planes hit the World Trade Center. My stocks nosedived. I ended up losing everything I worked hard to invest. My father was a volunteer firefighter and without hesitating, took off with mom to help with the cleanup. So we were without the coupons. Suddenly everything is expensive. But the cherry on top of all this sheet cake was losing my job. I came home a wreck. Didn't help the twins were screaming. Didn't help Janice came home with less than we needed for the week. Didn't help the used car salesman on TV was louder than he should have been. I don't remember why we stayed fighting to this day, but it was our first real fight. Both of our backs were breaking from the falling straws. It eventually led to her saying those fateful words, "I told you didn't have to do anything." I told of course I did. What kind of a father would I be if I just walked away? You're not the father. Soon as she said it her eyes were filled with regret. My mind is on fire. What? I ran out the back door. She ran after me and caught up from me throwing up. I sat down exhausted and my head spinning. This was nothing I ever thought Janice doing. She told me what happened those years ago in high school. She told me about the day she had bought the prom dress and tried it on in front of the tailor. The guy, she said, kept saying all these things to her and was really making her blush and hot and bothered. How her heart skipped a beat when he touched her to help fit her dress just so. How when she went to pay for the dress she asked how much the total was. The tailor gave a seductive smile and simply replied $3.50. The man transformed into a giant green monster from the Lake of Loch Ness herself, and his name was John Cena. He then proceeded to supplux and impregnate my wife. She had went over every detail how she thought about telling me, but was too scared. I would have thought she was a slut. I was a mess of emotions. I decided before I said anything else I would take a cold shower. When I got out of the shower I sat her down and decided to speak my mind. Now that it was clear, I told her we were no strangers to love at this stage. You know the rules of a relationship, and so do I now. There is no commitment at this point that I'm thinking of. But let me say that you wouldn't get this from any other man. I just want to tell how I'm feeling, and I got to have to make sure that you understand right now. I'm never going to give you up. I'm never going to let you down. I'm never going to run around and desert you. I'm never going to make you cry. I'm never going to say goodbye, and most importantly I'm never going to tell a lie and hurt you. I didn't say a word to her ever since, because this was something I decided to write on a whim, just because there isn't a serious tag on the original poster's inquiry. So I'm just filling in text to make this story appear more legit and see how many of you fall for this. While I'm here I'll just say I'm really getting annoyed with the videos subreddit being a dumping ground for people to soapbox their views onto all the men's rights, the racism rhetoric, and the constant complaints of social justice sensitivity ruining stuff. Can we just please go back to interesting viral videos? Is that too much to ask for? We ended up watching a movie about families with low self-esteem written by a man who was both a therapist and analyst. He's some actor now from what I looked up online. I owe a lot of the healing to him and how his guidance helped us through the hardest moment of our relationship. Mom and dad eventually returned from the Big Apple. We told them the news and they were able to handle it. I ended up landing another job and slowly building up my investments again. So this is my brother's story, and I doubt anyone will read it, but felt the need to share anyway. Pointy, let's call him Eric, had a son with a crazy, drug addict woman. She ended up sleeping with our other brother, let's call him Matt, around the time she got pregnant. She told him this after my nephew was 3, and he started to look almost exactly like our brother Matt at that age. I know family genetics. The thing is that Matt and Eric have different dads and Matt definitely looks like his father. Just like my nephew had started to. Well, he had gotten the DNA test set up after he had found out and was absolutely upset by the news and didn't exactly know how to handle it. Finally, he decided that he wasn't going to go through with it. He said that he loved him no matter what and that he was his son regardless of what the results were. He said it would devastate him to find out that it was biologically his and had to give custody over to Matt when Matt wanted nothing to do with him. Eric went as far to get complete custody from this woman and loves that kid more than anyone could imagine. I love my brother and I think he did the right thing for both of them. No matter what anyone else says. Also, just recently we had a friend whose girlfriend was pregnant. Found out it wasn't his and he killed himself. Incredibly sad and upsetting. Back in the 80s, a good friend got a girl pregnant around the same time my own girlfriend stopped taking the pill without telling me. So now we're 2 young musicians stuck with dad jobs we weren't looking for. No other friends have babies, so we start hanging out together more, taking the kids and girlfriends to the park and playgrounds etc. I didn't really know his new girlfriend before, but I started to see what a shitty mom she was. He appeared to be doing all the caring and parenting while she just picked fights with him and ignored her own daughter. I didn't see them for several weeks and somebody told me he was in county jail, accused by his girlfriend of having raped his own 18-month-old daughter. It made zero sense to me. I didn't go visit him because I had warrants, so I didn't see him for about 5 months. Finally I ran into him at a show. He'd lost all his front teeth from beatings in county because child molester, but he seemed positive and happy because he was declared not guilty at his trial. Apparently the girlfriend overstated her false accusation by claiming to have seen him penetrating their daughter with his penis. A medical examiner checked the child and ruled that was impossible, so the case fell apart. He was in the process of trying to get visiting rights to see his kid when the mom suddenly stated it wasn't actually his child. He insisted on a DNA test and learned that she wasn't lying this time. He never saw that little girl again. No legal consequences for the mom and he owed it years later. His not daughter's name still tattooed on his arm. Similar story. I'm a child who didn't know dad wasn't dad. All 3 parental figures were aware and I wasn't informed until I was 18, and even then it was forced. BO dad is John and stepdad is Ted, so mom and John are seemingly happy with the pregnancy and future child. A few weeks before the due date my mom up and leaves while John is at work. She moves several states away. Mom claims she doesn't know who father is, so no one on birth certificate. It takes several months for John to locate us and several more to get a paternity test and establish weekly visitation. Mom fought hard. During this time she met Ted. She then started dodging visits. 2 years and 104 scheduled/attempted visits later, John had seen me 11 times and he broke. He did something incredibly stupid. No one was hurt and was incarcerated for several years and had a permanent restraining order from my mom which extended to me until I was 18. Mom and Ted married when I was 4, still married. Ted was always kind and a great dad. The funny thing is I suspected I wasn't their kid and was sure of it when my half sister was born. But I thought Ted was my real dad and my mom wasn't. Ted and I are very similar personality wise, plus we both have similar minor medical issues. Mine are more likely to my mom doing her best impression of a chimney while pregnant with me. Conversely, my sister is my mom's clone point, so the lie lived for 18 years, with my mom stamping return to sender on all birthday and holiday cards sent from John. When I turned 18, mom's restraining order no longer applied to me. John decided to try to come up to find and meet me. He happened to run into my mom in town as he was looking. Mom rushed home, said crazy violent murdering stalking ex was in town, put a gun in my hand in case he came, and left. She said she was going to the police, which is half true. She went to find out where he was staying, so she could stand there and call the police on the restraining order. When she got back I called her out cause it just didn't add up. She told me he was actually my BO dad and his first name. Nothing else. A few years later after college and such I reached out to aunts and uncles, got more info, looked in old newspapers, and tracked him down. He lived across the country. Talked a while on the phone, and eventually went down to spend a week with him. He's a functional alcoholic in denial, who holds a grudge. Can't really blame him. Currently not talking much, because I called him out on drunk driving. The bright side is I've met a new uncle and cousins, and I'm getting along splendidly with them. I'm quite faked up, but managed to hide it well. A little late to the post, but here is my story point. I was dating this girl for over 1 year. Relationship was crappy and basically knew it was going to end. She was a very jealous person. I had a family member visit us from another country. She was bringing a friend. I had no idea who this second person was, but already my ex was being a jealous monster. I told her, if she is going to cause a scene at my mother's house, the relationship is over on the spot. Of course she causes a scene, and I end the relationship. My grandmother's friend was my age. Beautiful lady. We hit it off, and I made plans to move back to Germany. Fast forward, I come back home after my month-long vacation with my family and this girl. I'm slowly working on getting my things in order to move away. She tells me she is pregnant. We basically decided to work things out for the sake of the child. I end my brief relationship with the German girl. Fast forward, we have the baby. Our relationship gets worse, and I end it right before the child's first birthday. She takes me for child support and basically suffer through paying for 4 years. I meet my now wife and mother to my kids. I tell her the story and basically say I always had this hunch the child was not mine. I did one of those at-home paternity tests and the results were a resounding no. I was devastated. I loved the kid and was working towards fighting for full custody. When I confronted her, she basically admitted to it all. She immediately stopped the child support, although under current state law she doesn't need to. This all happened 6 years ago. In the end, I should have gotten the paternity test done, and she should have told me there was another guy. The one who loses out the most is the kid. I'm sure he remembers me to a point and the real father is not in his life. So, this isn't exactly in line with what the op asked, but I'm seeing a lot of similar stories, and it made me want to share mine. When I was 16, I met this girl in a Yahoo chat room. She was getting picked on in the public part of the chat room for some reason. Guys were calling her a hoe and stuff. It bothered me, so I stood up for her. She sent me a private message thanking me and all that, and from there we started talking every day. Turned out that she only lived about an hour away from me and was smoking hot. Webcams had just started becoming semi-common, and we would do cam-to-cam chats fairly often. We would buy phone cards so that we could talk on the phone every few days or so. Before I ever met her, I was head over heels in love, and she was reciprocating those feelings. After several months, we convinced our parents to help us meet in person. My parents drive me to her house, and we met her and her parents. My parents wanted us to have some alone time, so they went shopping. She took me to her aunt's house next door and introduced us, and then we went to the park. We sat on a picnic table, and eventually made out for a while. It was my first real kiss, but she made sure that I didn't feel insecure by telling me that I was a naturally amazing kisser. I went back home that night happier than I have ever been in my life and even more in love than I was before. We started taking things to the sexual level during our phone conversations, but she wanted to wait to have sex because she knew that we would want to do it every time we saw each other, and also that the time between our visits would be extra difficult. I was a virgin and she wasn't, so I was willing to follow her lead. A few months later, my parents bought me a truck, and I made a second visit. My parents didn't trust me to drive out of town yet, so they followed me there, got a hotel room, and just told me to be back there by 10 or 11. I went to her house, and she was home alone. We instantly made out with each other for a while, before she basically said, okay, no more. We can't do this yet. I took her out to eat, and we went to her father's house, so she could introduce us. The parents I met the first time were mom and stepdad, and so that I could meet her older sister. Everything went great. When it started getting dark, we decided to just pull into a grocery store parking lot and just sit and talk and kiss and stuff. She started tickling the palm of my hand with her finger and asked me if I know what it means when someone does that. I said no, and she looked at me and said, it means I want to go down on you. Is that okay? Of course I said hell yes, it's okay, but we can't do that in a parking lot. She tells me that she knows a spot and tells me how to get to this little area off the side of a dirt road that was pretty secluded. We pull in and she takes my duck out and starts giving me my first, and to this day one of the best, blue jobs I've ever had. After about 5 minutes of me trying my damnedest not to finish, she says, I want you to fuck me. I had a condom that I brought just in case, so I put it on, and we had awkward but mind-blowing sex in the passenger seat of my truck. I lasted like 20 minutes somehow, and when it was over she said she had never had sex that good. I drove her home, completely filled with a confidence that I had never dreamed of owning. Dropped her off, went back to the hotel, and my parents were furious because I was an hour late. They refused to let me go see her before we went back home the next day, as had been the plan. I was also grounded for a week, so we couldn't talk at all. Towards the end of that week, her mom called my mom and basically said, I think you should know that our kids had sex last weekend. I'm not going to allow her to talk to him anymore. Apparently the girl had written me a letter that she was going to mail to me since we couldn't talk. In the letter she mentioned the sex stuff. Her mom found it before she sent it. My mom was okay with it, especially since I assured her we used protection, and she told me that I could talk to her as much as I want if she was willing to disobey her mom. I called her mom and tried to reason with her. You can't do this to us. We are in love. She's your daughter, and I make her happy, and we can't undo what happened. I promise I'll never let it happen again until we are married. Her mom basically said, look, everybody has their first. I promise you, she doesn't love you like you think she does. This is for your own good. I wanted to cuss her out or something, but I just hung up and cried my eyes out. Of course, we continued to talk online and would occasionally sneak phone calls. She also started giving me shows on webcam at night sometimes. We had plans to meet up in secret on her birthday that was coming up in a couple of months. One day, she called me out of the blue. She was pregnant, and she just knew that I was going to leave her. I told her hell no, I would be a man and do my part. I also felt like a baby would force her parents to back off, and we could be together. This is where it gets faked up. She starts crying and says it won't work. A few years ago she had an eating disorder that got so bad that she had to have surgery. The doctors told her that if she got pregnant within 5 or so years, there would be serious complications that could kill her. Also, she had already established the fact that she was very firmly against the idea of abortion. She told me I would rather die than do that. I didn't tell my mom, but I told all of my close friends. I was absolutely depressed. I was convinced that this was all my fault. I should have never trusted a condom. I figured I had faked up by trying to put it on backwards at first and got some ejaculation on the outer tip. I had essentially ruined both of our lives by being a dumb horny teenager. This went on for a couple of more months. On the day before her birthday, when we had been planning to meet up in secret for months, I came home from school and my mom sat me down. She told me that my cousin had told her everything because he was worried about me. So she had called my girlfriend's mom and her mom basically said no, she's no pregnant. I know for a fact. I've been monitoring her periods ever since I found out about them having sex, and I also gave her a pregnancy test. She's never had any surgery. That was a lie. Also, she's been dating this other guy that she met at school. Her mom agreed that I deserved closure though, so she gave her permission to call me and tell me the truth. She called me and I just said, your mom must be lying. What the fuck is wrong with her? None of that is true, is it? And she confessed to everything. When I asked why, all she could say is because I'm stupid. I don't know. I'm sorry. I just raged into the phone, told her I hope she dies and hung up. Sorry that this became so long-winded, but I feel like every detail is important because I really want to convey how much this hurt me. It's been 12 years now, and I've considered myself over it for a long time. I even met up with her one time when I was 20, and we had a good time. No sex though. But just going through all these details again has me on the verge of tears. Since then, I've been in a few relationships, even fell in love a couple of more times. Never like it was with her though, and the other women I fell in love with ended up cheating on me and getting caught. Meeting that girl just put the wheels in motion for a lot of sadness and trust issues. All I can do is try to not let it ruin me, but I think it's too late. TLDR, I lost my virginity to my high school girlfriend that emotionally manipulated me into believing that I got her pregnant and she was going to die from it. I recounted it for the first time in roughly 10 years and now I'm finally crying over it.